talent alone doesn't matter. And in this video, I'll be explaining why. I'm sure that as we've played football throughout the years, we've all noticed players that were just amazing. Maybe you even think that you are amazing. Players that really make a difference in certain leagues, and you look at the way they move, the way they perform, everything about them, and you just thought, these players need to make it pro. Like, these are the players that are going to make it pro. And I've had players like that I've seen in the past. I've had players that I thought without a doubt were going to make it as professional players, like absolute killers. And they never did. And this is not a video, I don't want this video is not going to be about, you know, talent isn't everything, you need hard work. Like, that's the obvious side of the coin, right? But I am starting to see a lot of people in comments around the football world commenting about, when I say the football world, I mean like even just locally, like within Australia, different forums or whatever, people in my comments, they sort of fight against, do we need to go to Europe for exposure? Players should be good enough in their own country to make it. And while I think that that's a great sentiment to have, I think it would be great if the world was black and white, it was clean cut, and the very best of us were the ones getting the opportunities. I, for one, know so many players that are playing professional, like first division, players that you probably don't even know their names, and I've trained with them. I've physically kicked a ball with them while they're, you know, while me making no money as a football player and them making 200,000-300,000 a year, right? And the level is not always there. Like, that gap where you look at professional footballers, you go, oh wow, that level is there. It definitely exists, and it definitely exists with, say, the top end of professional elite players. But when we start coming down to like first div, second div players and their level, that the gap between them and an NPL system is so much closer than you'd think. And so we're all human at the end of the day. And I think that when we're looking at players and going, well, if you can't make it in Australia, what makes you think you're gonna make it in Europe? To me, it's pretty simple. I think I've seen it growing up. I've spoken to people about it. The co-founder of Elite Football, Maurice, also agrees with me, and he's got 20 years on top of me football knowledge. Our systems in Australia and other parts of the world, like the States, Canada, which are similar to how we do our football, it is so political that a lot of the times the players that do deserve the shots don't get the shots. And so what happens, and what I've noticed, is around the 14, 15-year-old mark, is that certain players get priority, certain players get picked, and once a player gets into that sort of NPL club, into that NPL system or whatever it is, they're just gonna ride that wave until they're 18, 19 or whatever. And all of a sudden people know this player's name, and there might be a player playing state league that, you know, talented, was better than him, but because this other guy has now been competing at a higher level for longer, he's a little bit better, right? But really, someone that wasn't given the shot, if he was to have had those hours of football under his belt, he could have easily been just as good, if not better, right? And unfortunately, something that just happens like a lot in the football world, and you can't help it, right? Because people have different opinions. But to say that there's players that shouldn't be going overseas for trials, or shouldn't have that exposure because if they're just not talented enough to make it in Australia, they're not going to make it overseas, I think is complete BS. Because when you understand that the football world is a business and everyone's looking out for their own agenda, it's all about finding someone that actually wants to back you, right? Because if you were to find that coach, you know, we've all seen, you know, there's parents that then give their kids, you know, the best platform on the team. And I've even was coached under my dad, and I remember one of the best seasons I ever had in my life. I was playing NPL, my dad was the coach. I ended up top goal scorer of the team and the league, my dad being the coach. And I don't know today if it was really because I was that good, or if because I actually got that shot to sort of play in that team. Like, I knew I had my role preserved. I was playing exactly where I wanted to play. Everything was exactly as I wanted for it to be, and I achieved that amazing season, right? But my dad was the coach. And so I've also had seasons where the coach sucked, or I was getting put in position I didn't want to play, the way we played was different, all this sort of stuff. And I definitely had really bad seasons around the same sort of few years where my level was at like a really good level, around when I was 18. And so even just seeing that and understanding that, well, I was giving a shot, everything was faced, cards were dealt for me to be able to actually perform and play the game that I wanted to play. The football's the same everywhere. Like, there's certain players that get that same focus. There's certain players that are going to actually get that exact position on a team. The coach is going to love them, and build a team around them or whatever. And so it happens throughout all levels of football. I've experienced it from both sides, and sometimes it's really annoying when you see that a coach is giving a player that exact role and they're not performing, because then you know they definitely don't deserve it. And that also happens all the time. But what I'm trying to say is that talent alone is not going to get you across the line. I think it's BS to think that just because you're a really good player, like a lot of times people say, oh, if you're, an amazing player, if you're so good, they won't be able to ignore you. The truth is though, yes, they can still ignore you. There's players that are that good, that are performing really high and are still getting ignored. And there's also players that could have the potential to play that high or show those stats, right, to get attention, but are just in the wrong areas. They're in the wrong teams. They've hidden behind other players that aren't as good because of politics. And that all comes down to who is investing in you, who you're working with that's actually going to then put you in the right spots, because everyone has their own agenda. Everyone's looking out for themselves. And if you need to look out for yourself, it is sometimes about working with someone that's going to actually look out for you. And this is the hardest thing with football. This is a lot of the stuff that we talk about when players are picking, an agent. But the idea is that you need to be put in places that are gonna work for you. And talent isn't everything, because if you're talented, that's it. No one knows about you. There's a big saying, I'm from Argentina. When we talk to coaches or people from Argentina, they say that, there's hundreds of thousands of Messis in Argentina. The only difference is they're not able to be corrected because of their habits, right? They weren't fortunate enough to be picked up, be strict with themselves, and actually get out of the situation that they need to get out of. And I think when we're talking about South America, Africa, all these different countries that tend to be on the less fortunate side, where the escape is definitely a lot harder. When we then focus on Australia, USA, and Canada, for you guys, it is 10 times easier to get different opportunities. And it's just about exposing yourself, because if you were to jump to 10 different clubs and actually have a trial and actually be looked at, I guarantee you're going to have at least one of them feel like the right fit for you. A lot of times, even in Australia, I notice the players go to 1 or 2 clubs and that's it. That's where they draw the line. It's like that's not how it works. And look, football, like business, when I first started businesses, my friends and the people that knew me weren't the first people that backed me when I was trying to improve or trying to be someone different to them. And football's the same thing. The people that are going to back you are not the people that already know you. So even just moving, even if you want to do interstate, moving from, say, Gold Coast to Melbourne or to Sydney or something like that, and being exposed to different people, the likelihood of them backing you as a fresh fish over someone that they know that played in this other team or whatever is so much higher. It's dumb how it works. The world shouldn't work like this, but that's just how it does. So when I send players from Australia to Spain, they get viewed at differently. Like, the club's gonna have first time love goggles on the player, at least till they see the first few training sessions. And so that's just how it works. Talent isn't enough, and if you don't have someone that's willing to expose you, or if you're not exposing yourself, nothing's ever gonna happen for you. That's just how it is. Because I've seen players that are playing in clubs that you would die to play for, and I'm annoyed at myself to have learned it at a later age, but there's really almost nothing that separates you and them. It's really just about connections at the end of the day, and that sucks because it doesn't feel fair, but life isn't fair, and you just kind of have to play the game, right? Because there's no point complaining about it. Play the game and do the same thing they did to get to where they are. A lot of these players, it's crazy. Like, there'll be an agent that represents a coach in Brisbane Roar, and I know a player that then got sold to Brisbane Roar, and they share the same agent. Like, the agent is representing the coach and also the player. And it's like, what are the chances of that actually happening? When you actually think about it, what are the odds of, the club just happened to want this random player that you would have never heard of before, and the coach, and they both share the same agent, right? And they both completely different nationalities, whatever, right? It's not chance, it's not luck, it's just business. This is just how it works. It's how the world works. And it really is all about connections. I'm not gonna lie, obviously you need to have a certain level, but I think that the gap is so much closer than what people try and say it is. And I think it's because people it's easier for them to be like, oh, well, I wasn't good enough to get there because XYZ, and that, allows them to flip the page over, but really there's so many more players that could replace the people that you see on TV. The gap really, actually, football world is smaller than you think, and it's unfortunate most people don't understand that you need to actually have the connections, because no one's going to see you, no one knows who you are. So yeah, that was my rambling. Those are my 2 cents. Talent isn't everything. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, and if you want to hear me ramble again, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind.